Welcome back. You're watching New Day Saturday edition. We're live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7, and we're streaming live online at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. We'll be getting straight into the conversations this morning, but before then, I'll introduce the panelists for the conversation this morning. We currently have in the studio Mr. Eric Amwakuchum. He is a member of the NPP communications team. Next is Professor John Gachi. He is the head of Department of Finance at the University of Cape Coast. And also we have Mr. Joe Jackson. He is with Dalex Finance. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
We are expecting the Honorable Hussaini to join us from the NDC camp. When he comes in, we'll do the needful and introduce him accordingly. But we'll start off the conversations with the three panelists in studio. Of course, we'll start off our conversations with a look at the developments within the banking space, where this week we were informed by the Bank of Ghana that some 5 banks, owing to certain situations, have been collapsed, and they have been, as a result of that collapse, there's been the creation or the establishment of a new indigenous bank called the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited. We do have some sound bites from the Bank of Ghana governor. We'll take a listen to that and return to the panelists in the studio.
In the case of Sovereign Bank Limited, as part of Bank of Ghana's investigations into the failure of Capital Bank Limited, currently in receivership, it emerged that Sovereign Bank's license was obtained by false pretenses through the use of suspicious and non-existent capital. The bank is insolvent and unable to meet daily liquidity obligations falling due. Liquidity support granted so far to the bank amounts to 21 million as at 31st July 2018. The bank has not been able to publish its audited accounts for December 2017 in violation of Section 90 of Act 930. Beige Bank and Construction Bank were each granted provisional licenses in 2016 and launched in 2017. Subsequent investigations conducted by the Bank of Ghana revealed that, similar to the case of Sovereign Bank, both banks obtained their banking licenses under false pretenses using suspicious and non-existent capital, which has resulted in a situation in which their reported capital is inaccessible to them for their operations. Ladies and gentlemen, to support the government's twin objective of financial stability and strengthening indigenous banks, the Bank of Ghana is consolidating the good assets and liabilities of Unibank Ghana Limited, the Royal Bank Limited, the Beige Bank Limited, Sovereign Bank Limited, and the Construction Bank Limited to become the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited with immediate effect. The bank has approved Mr. Daniel Addo as the new Chief Executive of the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited. In addition, the government has appointed the following as the key management people to support in transitioning into the new established Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited. They are Mr. Simon Donu, who would be the Consolidated Bank Director in charge of Unibank, Mr. Alex Dodu, Consolidated Bank Director in charge of Royal, Ms. Kesua Brown, Consolidated Bank Director in charge of Construction Bank, Mr. Babatunde Ampa, Consolidated Bank Director in charge of Beige Bank, and Boulders Advisors Limited, led by Mr. Reggie France, as advisor to the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited. The Bank of Ghana has also appointed Mr. Nidodu Amano of KPMG as the receiver in respect of the bad loan assets of the 5 banks under Section 123 of the Banks and Specialized Deposit-Taking Institutions 2016, that is Act 930. The government of Ghana has recapitalized the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited to take on the selected good assets and all liabilities of these 5 banks. the government has also issued a bond of 5.76 billion cedis to cover the gap between the liabilities and good assets assumed by the consolidated bank.
So that was the governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Addison, there at the press conference this week, where we were informed of the news that had come up regarding the 5 banks and the creation of the Consolidated Bank Ghana. I'll start the conversation with you, Mr. Joe Jackson, and quickly I want to make reference to the press release that was issued by the Bank of Ghana in March 2018. And the reason why I'm doing this is because even though we are looking at 5 banks now, we do know that the case of Unibank had come up earlier on, where the Bank of Ghana had issued a press statement saying that the bank had they had appointed an official administrator in the entity of KPMG to go in. And I'm just quoting a paragraph or some section here in that press statement where they said they were to go in to rehabilitate and return the bank to regulatory compliance and viability within a period of 6 months, at the end of which the bank will be returned to private ownership and management. Now, what I'm getting from this is that even at that time in March 2018, Unibank, as bad as the information that was coming out was, the Bank of Ghana nonetheless saw, if you like, there was some glimmer of hope in there. And so go in there, see what you can do, see if you can rehabilitate it and bring it back to private management. But then even before the 6 months are up, the Bank of Ghana now comes back to say, well, looking at things, the bank is beyond redemption, is beyond rehabilitation. My question then is, what happened between March and now for this to inform the Bank of Ghana's decision? Is it that the Bank of Ghana, by virtue of KPMG going into Unibank as the official administrator, unearthed or came by some information that it didn't previously have? Because you're looking at a situation where in March the picture already looked gloomy, but then there was that indication that it could very well be rehabilitated and brought back to private management. Less than 6 months into the work of KPMG, we are being told that, well, it's beyond redemption. I just want us to understand, or I just want to understand what could have, necessitated this decision of a total failure of the bank.
Well, good morning. Good morning to all your viewers and listeners. I think there are 2 things there. Number one, by asking the existing management and directors to step away, obviously there was a lot more information available.
Right.
And when you listen, when you read through the statements, etc., there's one key thing, which is the size of the loans that were given to shareholders, directors, and related parties.
Right.
That figure was humongous. It was huge. It's reported to be in excess of 5 billion. I suspect that was a key part of just saying that this is beyond redemption, and the amount of, and remember that there was also reported that something in the region of 3 billion was being kept off the books and was not recorded. Then you bring in all these issues to do with the purchase of shares for ADB, etc. My sense is that it was really the Bank of Ghana just threw up its arms, says, listen, this is not possible to salvage it. We're throwing good money after bad. Listen, when you hear that liquidity support was used for financial, I don't know what to call it, then you're beyond the pale. It's really as if there was no attempt to really run this institution properly.
But I guess what I'm driving at really with this whole background is that did Bank of Ghana only get this information when KPMG stepped in?
It has to be.
So then it raises questions about the BOG itself and how it's able to...
Oh no, the questions are huge.
Right.
Because one of the things we have to ask ourselves is this. Who were the auditors, first of all, of Unibank?
Right.
What role did they play? Each year, each half year, the auditors will give us a certificate of clean health. What did it mean? Can we trust them? Listen, and it's not just them. Yep. Where were the banking supervision guys?
Exactly.
Where were they? Of course, the directors, the shareholders of each of these institutions carry their share of the blame.
Totally.
But even beyond that is the fact that banking supervision went in. Auditors were there. I mean, when you look at some of the auditors, you have Sovereign Bank. It was being audited by Ernst & Young. You ask them what was happening. You have Royal. It was being audited by Deloitte and Touche. What was happening? We have to ask questions. And can we trust these auditors? Should they even be allowed to continue to audit other financial institutions, given the failures that have occurred? Shouldn't there be a probe into this? In other jurisdictions, auditing firms have collapsed because of things like this.
Right.
And this is not just one institution. We're now talking about 7 institutions that have the same thing.
Right.
What did the auditors do? If truly what the Bank of Ghana says with the going to the bank and obtaining a license under
false pretenses.
Because remember, what happens is, if I want to set up a bank today, I walk to the Bank of Ghana and I say, hey, here's my money. Here's 1,000 cedis. I want to set up a bank and I want to start trading. The Bank of Ghana requires my 1,000 cedis, because if I incur any losses in trading, doing business with my depositors' funds, I have some amount of money to cushion the
depositors and all
the loss. Now, if we find out that the 1,000 cedis I put there was not my money, if we find out that it was pledged, it was a loan, whatever it is, then I have falsely presented myself to the Bank of Ghana. But you ask yourself, so when this was done, who are auditors? Who allowed me to go and take a loan and come and pledge? What did the Bank of Ghana follow up? And there's so many questions.
So many questions.
And we cannot, in as much as we give credit to the current governor for taking bold, decisive action, the institution runs. And one of the things we are seeking to find is what will be done to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Very well. On that question, I move to Dr. Gachi. Clearly, there's an issue here involving the regulator and operators within that whole space. Clearly, the regulator cannot be left out when you're looking at how the issues have panned out or played out over time. I asked a question about, Unibank in particular, because it had come up earlier on. But then we have the remaining 4 also come up. Issues about false pretenses being the basis upon which licenses were issued and all have come in, raising issues about either dereliction of duty of the Bank of Ghana or complicity, if not dereliction. What are your thoughts? How do you see this playing out further?
Well, clearly, we cannot take the regulator out of this problem. The regulator is doing a lot to ensure we have a sound and stable banking system. But if you look at the work of the regulator over time, they were the one who was supervising. They were receiving returns. They were studying it. They have been receiving auditors' report, etc. So one is of the view that they should have known that something untoward was going on.
Right.
But I also feel I need to be very fair to the regulator, because if you find in the at 9:30, there is a serious penalty slap on those banks, directors and management who mislead bank officers. So it is possible that people can hide things. Now, anytime the Bank of Ghana decides that an administrator should go into any bank, it means that they have found something which violates the conditions on which the license was given. So that is a clear indication that you need to go in and do more. Now, when you send an administrator there, if you read the law very carefully, they need to be given the password, and they will change the password. So they have a free access to the system. So it is possible that during the process, they will be able to find out things that the Bank of Ghana initially was not able to find. And I believe that is what happened clearly in the case of Unibank. If you read the art clearly, it is obvious that you cannot be investing your money hugely in immovable property. When the administrators went there, it seems they found that that offense was committed.
It had been, yes.
So there are a lot of things that they didn't know very clearly before the administrator went in.
But
and when the administrators went in, you realize that the workers will be opening up things that were not known to the regulator, because at that time they will not be opening up to the regulator, officers, supervisors who are coming. At this point in time, you realize that they are now working together. More information will be coming, and that gives more information to the administrator. Now, it is true that initially the Bank of Ghana was expecting that the administrator will go in, they will find out how they will be able to resuscitate the bank. But there are some offenses that go to the core of the issue. And the moment those offenses are committed, the Bank of Ghana has no choice but to activate, the sanctions that ought to be activated, especially the withdrawal of licenses and the rest. So I think that is a peculiar case about Unibank. And we cannot fault the regulator too much, even though we know that they couldn't do their work as effectively as it ought to be. But there is a provision in the Act which indicates that there is that possibility that the players in the industry can hold information from officers and can mislead officers. And when that happens, it is considered as a serious offense. It will interest you to to note that most of the offenses that we are talking about, there are administrative penalties slapped on them. It is only in the case of deceit of a Bank of Ghana officer where an additional penalty of going to jail of about 2 years was slapped, because that is the crucible of the whole matter. Because if you're not able to be transparent with the officers who come to work there, then they cannot get the correct information and make informed decision.
Good. I do appreciate the point about the fact that the law as it is anticipates a situation where definitely people would fall foul and then the right sanctions would be applied. But I believe there's also the need to ensure timeliness so that it's not over a long period of time for these things to have accumulated, because at that point it's of a certain degree or magnitude that it becomes pretty much a dire situation.
Well, I think you will need to look at it holistically. I think the purpose of this forum is to discuss the thing comprehensively so that a blame game is not too much. You see, we are on a journey. Around 2014, asset quality review was done. And the Bank of Ghana realized that there's the need for deeper work to be done. So in 2016, they widened it and use all the 4 major auditing firms to do. In fact, in some cases, they swap auditors. So if KPMG was auditing Bank A, maybe during that process, Ernst & Young would have gone there just to get deeper understanding of the scale of problem in the banking sector. And that was done. In fact, that informed the promulgation into law or the revision and amendment of the old Act. And if you look at the new Act clearly, you realize that it is focusing on addressing these issues that we are talking about. But the Act was put in place in September. And the transitional provision is that it should become effective 90 days. 90 days we have entered into 2017.
It's gone beyond.
Yeah. So my understanding is that assuming that old leaders of Bank of Ghana were still opposed, they would have been taking similar measures, because they have now unearthed what was going on. It is now left to activating the specific provisions in the Act to address the issue. But so that is the angle I want to
quickly before I go to the other panelists here, I on the bit about the time that had to lapse before it came into force. You're looking at a situation also where certain issues that have been raised clearly happened before or out of, if you like, the complicity of certain officials there, because you're looking at acquiring licenses under false pretenses and other matters. clearly there's that element of, you know, because the Bank of Ghana in its statement actually makes that allusion when it says that questionable licensing processes and weak enforcement. So that in itself is indicative that...
Yes, you see, you need to understand the process. You are given a provisional license. You withheld information. At that time, the officers were not able to uncover it. Now, the new governor gave the full license. So do we say that he is culpable? For me, the answer is no, because you have deceived an officer of the bank. So if not so, the new governor wouldn't have gone to, the launching of some of these banks, because at that time, my understanding is that
gone by the book.
He didn't get the information. And also remember that because the thing is widespread, you will get people within the industry who will be giving information. And those information will become a lead on which the governor will be acting. So it is not as if maybe the current governor and the previous governor saw these things happening, but they decided that they will not do anything about it.
Okay, I don't think we're trying to suggest that at all. It's just we're looking at the system as a whole and what could
Of course, the Bank of Ghana need to be reformed.
Exactly, look within itself in as much as it's looking externally at the operators within the space. Let me quickly introduce the Honorable Inusaf Hussaini, MP for Tamale Central and also the ranking member of the Constitutional, Parliamentary and Legal Affairs of Parliament. Good morning, Honourable. You're welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
It's good to have you on the show. So we'll move on quickly to Mr. Eric Amwakuchum. For your perspective on this, what's happening? I mean, some have said we saw this coming. This shouldn't be a surprise, but the magnitude of it, perhaps, is quite shocking, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to my co-panelists here and then to the viewers out there. Well, it looks like we've been waiting for this thing to unravel for a while. The commentary that preceded this, I think it's been probably 3 or 4 years, where various industry experts and commentators have basically given us some kind of indication of the sort of mess that was going on in our financial sector.
Right.
And I think that, excuse me, that was probably the reason why the BOG itself decided to go into its act, and then also the processes to make sure that even the banks would be recapitalized, and then further scrutiny would also be done to make sure that we don't suffer a meltdown. I look at it from the perspective of this present governor, who has been able to come in and acted with dispatch and has been shown a lot of conviction and being decisive in taking these decisions to, one, forestall untold hardships on the depositors. And I think that in all these things, in a larger scheme of things, the depositors are the most important people here, because these are people who probably have had their life savings or have done all sorts of work to be able to put their monies in these financial institutions, and then they have to be protected. So for me, I think that it's also imperative that we commend the BOG on that score. And then also, by extension, government, by making sure that the depositors have had some kind of protection in terms of making sure that their monies are still intact. But then we also look at it from a bigger perspective. I mean, I would cede the regulatory and the financial side of things to the experts on the panel. But even as a casual observer, in terms of the sector itself, where you realize that even as an economy, it's not such a huge economy. And you look at the number of banks that are playing in the sector and the sort of strategic direction of some of these banks. Sometimes you sit back and you realize that this was meant to happen. You know, so for instance, you have these banks that are supposed to be too small to even be able to invest in big ticket items. And then you'd ask yourself, what sort of research or marketing strategy do they have, for instance, to make sure that they're able to take advantage of emerging trends, emerging opportunities, so that they'll be able to actually use your money judiciously and use it properly to be able to, one, make some returns for you to be able to pay all the huge interest that they were promising and all of these things. Then you ask yourself the question of vis-a-vis the foreign-owned banks and then the local banks in terms of even the sort of services that were being given to customers, right? So you ask yourself the question of where, if you sit back, you realize that there's this aggressive sales orientation where, okay, go and look for
with high targets and all.
Yeah, people to deposit. But then what happens after that? You understand? So you realize that all of these things happened. There were calls for banks or the smaller ones to even merge. But then with all of these things unraveling, you realize that it would have been extremely difficult. Because if you have all of these things hiding in a closet somewhere, all the cobwebs, then how are you able to actually come together and merge? Because then this would come out, right? So these are some of the reasons why I think that the issues have come up. If you look at what has happened in the past, even elsewhere, where the issue of the financial meltdown in 2008, the subprime issues where people were giving themselves 130% mortgages and all of those things. And that led to a global financial crisis, right? And I would have expected that we would have actually taken lessons from these, where big banks like issues have come with Enron and Freddie Mac and all of those big financial institutions, UBS. So even as a small country, in that perspective, we should have taken lessons from that and had done some real scrutiny in terms of people who were actually directors of these companies or entities who were actually pushing these banks. Because if you read you listen to the BOG governor and the sort of things that were actually going on in some of these institutions, people, the ordinary Ghanaian on the street will be asking themselves, well, why are these people probably even walking free? And that people have actually put the investments and savings of people at risk and they are out there walking free. So we need to ask ourselves these questions.
Sure.
Again, then where do we start? Do we now create a situation where we are going to learn lessons from these things to make sure that we put together a structure and procedures and processes that will forestall this in the future? So, for instance, the Bank of Ghana itself. I mean, I think that there's an attempt to sort of absolve them from some of these issues. But the point is that if the regulatory framework and the systems within the BOJ itself is working properly, maybe we wouldn't have gotten to this point. Or maybe we would have gotten to it earlier. We'd have actually been able to nip it in the bud at an earlier stage. And this has happened. Of course, that is also a lesson to the existing banks, the ones that haven't been affected. I know for a fact that there are still some that are going through some difficulties. But then if they are facing the same or they have some of the similar issues, then it will be extremely difficult to be able to even merge, which means that we are probably a few months away from another crisis. But it's better to deal with the issues now so that it doesn't have an untold repercussion for the entire Ghanaian economy. And of course, it's also important that people would have some kind of confidence in our financial sector. Because once you have a broken down financial sector, then the economy itself is in some kind of crisis. It is unfortunate, but I believe strongly that we've gotten to the point that it gives us an opportunity to right the wrongs and create a system. And the banks themselves have to do
system
an introspection as to, so for instance, you take yourself as a customer. Why would I be doing business with Bank A as opposed to Bank B? I remember some years back, I don't want to mention the bank's name, the guy who was actually director of marketing actually told me that their customers do not expect customer service. And I was like, why? He said, oh, because these are people who wants to go to the same teller. And I'll give you a typical example.
Quickly,
I had an experience working with Tigo when we tried to deploy these mobile money system fintech. And there were banks in this country that actually rejected the idea. And EcoBank, at the time, even when it was basically an innovative product, whatever, decided that they wanted to take the plunge. Guess what? Now, mobile money is a quarter of the Ghanaian GDP, and 80% of this float sits with EcoBank.
Right. So clearly the lessons are learned.
So the lessons are there. So we need to also even activate and take advantage of the technology that exists today, especially in an environment where 70 to 80% of our people are actually playing in the informal sector. Right.
Thanks for that. Lots of questions to be asked, lots of questions coming up. But Honorable, quickly, your general perspectives on what's happening, but specifically looking at the situations as painted by the Bank of Ghana. You're looking at the banks, Unibank, Royal Bank and Sovereign Bank, where the Bank of Ghana informs us that, shareholders, related and connected parties have taken out, for instance, with Unibank, an amount of 5.3 billion from the bank, and that constitutes 75% of the total assets of the bank. And now this figure is broken down into 3.7 billion that was neither granted through the normal credit delivery process nor reported as part of the bank's loan portfolio. An additional 1.6 billion had been granted to shareholders, related and connected parties in the form of loans and advances without due process and in breach of relevant provisions of Act 930. I mean, looking at this situation, and the same with Royal Bank and Sovereign Bank, they go on to give the same instances of shareholders, related and connected parties, benefiting from unduly, as it were, from the system that they had created for themselves. What does that say to you, that this actually happened over a certain period?
Thank you so very much, and let me say good morning to my co-panelists and your viewers. Indeed, the revelation by the Bank of Ghana in terms of the activities of this bank as regards their depositors has been very worrying. Worrying because they appear to be elements of a breach of trust between the depositors and the owners of the bank, the shareholders of the bank. It gives an impression that what we had suspected all along as a people, that probably the regulatory functions of the Bank of Ghana was not being carried out effectively, has come to pass. Because I've heard my co-panelists say that every year you have auditors getting to the banks and looking at how operations are carried out, simply because it is the responsibility of the Bank of Ghana to ensure that the people of this country, and particularly the depositors, are not hard done by the activities of these banks. So what have they been uncovering? True. What have they been seeing?
Auditing all this while.
All this while. What have they been seeing? And so, yes, I think that the decision, the regulatory decision of the Bank of Ghana to ensure that activities of banks, and especially these 5 banks, are brought under the regulatory ambit of the Bank of Ghana is in the right direction. To the fact that the Bank of Ghana has taken steps to ensure that depositors do not suffer unduly by reason of the actions taken, is also commendable. Because what is happening can fundamentally affect the banking sector of this country, because loss of confidence in the banking sector can lead us back to the days where people put their monies
under their beds. Yeah.
And so it's very important that we get this clear. But again, it gives an impression of a wider rot within the financial sector. DKM, how did they operate for so many years that they were able to swindle farmers without being caught by the regulatory ambit of the law? Many others, I can mention many other financial institutions.
I'm super excited you brought in the DKM thing, because I wanted us to go there, so let me quickly bring this in. At least we've benefited from what happened. Well, we've seen how UT Bank and Capital Bank were treated. Quickly, GCB came in to take over under a certain agreement. You know, we've seen what's happening with the 5 banks now. There's this consolidation, and like you said earlier, indeed, all your co-panelists have also alluded to that. It looks like the overriding motivation here is the depositors' interest. So, looking at the 3 instances, and I'm bringing in the DKM bit because you brought in the DKM. So, you've seen what happened with UT Bank and Capital Bank. You've seen what's happening with the 5 now. Why didn't we see that same level of a certain motivation to protect depositors' interest in the DKM? Because with the DKM, you see a certain difference in how the regulator acted. There was liquidation of DKM. So my question is, what informed the decision to liquidate DKM as opposed to what we are seeing now with the 5 and perhaps with the first 2 that went down, Capital Bank and UT Bank, so that for the banks, you seem to see a certain action that really ensures the safety of depositors' monies. But with DKM, I don't know how far it's gone with, how the depositors are being paid their monies. Because we do know that the liquidator was paying them, but not to the tune of what they had invested.
Well, that's very interesting. And you see, to understand DKM and other actors in the non-banking sector, you need to go back to the Bank of Ghana.
Right.
When DKM happened, Parliament invited the Bank of Ghana to brief Parliament on what had occasioned this, because we realized that a majority of the customers of DKM were just the poor farmers, and they had lost their life savings by reason of the activity of DKM. And DKM had moved their resources into landed property as well. And there are many financial institutions in this country who are moving depositors' money into landed property.
Sure.
And depositors can come for their money at any time. And so that puts a strain. What did they tell us? They told us that there were many non-banking financial institutions in this country that simply did not have the license to operate. The question is, if you find non-banking financial institutions operating with that appropriate authorization, what do you do? Because you are still the regulator, whether they have the license. Like my colleague, I didn't meet him to know his name, has said.
Professor Gachi. Dr. Gachi.
Gachi. Oh, my Gachi from, wow. My brother from Cape Coast. Yes. Like he has said, what clearly has happened is that the Bank of Ghana wanted to ensure that the banks complied with the tenets of the law. So, where a banking institution or a non-financial institution has got authorization to operate that business, but fails, refuses, or neglects to comply, he's still due for sanctions. Where a non-banking financial institution is engaged in the activities of banking or offering non-banking financial services without due authorization, that's a criminal act. So, in all these instances, what has the Bank of Ghana been doing? And we can cite many. Piram, you remember the old Piram, Jackson, Piram. I mean, CIG in Ghana. So, what has the Bank of Ghana been doing? For us, it is important that proactive steps are taken and not reactive steps. Because reactive steps, when taken, can shake the fundamental foundations of the banking institution. And so I will encourage the Bank of Ghana. And you see, transparency in this matter is also very important. Like we have said, we got the first indicators that something was wrong with our financial institution, with Capital and UT.
Long before that, actually.
Long before that, actually. And so what's happened? A decision was taken with UT and Capital. What do we know about it now? What do we know? What is the status of the bank? So you see, in treating all these matters, yes, we must commend the Bank of Ghana, but we must also demand some level of transparency in the dealings of the banks, because Professor Dr. Gache has said somewhere that the Ghana government owes Unibank in the region of over 800 million Ghana cedis. So has the debt affected the liquidity ratio of the bank? And if so, has it contributed to the sinking of this bank? And
but that obviously cannot take away the fact that there were certain irregularities.
It obviously cannot. I mean, moving money to buy landed property, clearly, without authorization, is something else. I don't want to pronounce on them so that we will start to be judging, but it is very inappropriate. Very, very inappropriate. Giving money to shareholders without due process is criminal.
Totally.
It's criminal.
And speaking of criminality, we do have an issue. Yes, I'll come to you. Very well. Quickly come in, yes.
Okay. You were talking about the difference between DKM and the banks. Now, it's important to realize that DKM was a non-bank.
Right.
Now, what you have is, when you put your money in a bank, your deposits are protected. When you invest your money in a non-bank, you're taking a risk. And there's a significant difference between the two. That difference is also shown by the levels of interest that you're offered in both cases. If you go and put in your savings, you're giving what? 2%, 5%. If you take your money to a non-bank, you're getting now you're getting over 20%.
High risk investments.
Exactly. So you got to realize that the Bank of Ghana differentiates between an investment in a non-bank.
But that's interesting.
It is interesting.
Whether you are a bank or a non-bank,
you're both regulated
and by the Bank of Ghana.
Yes, but the level of protection offered you is different.
So there's discrimination in there.
Well, listen,
it is. Whether justified or not, there still is some discrimination.
I won't call it discrimination, because the level of return, you're taking more risk. That's why there's a difference between a bank and a non-bank.
But just, you are the experts on this, but let me just, I just want to understand. So in other words, depositors who put money in a non-bank institution, if it goes bust, you find yourself to blame, and you can't find protection under.
You have some
the regulator
protection.
Doesn't owe you a certain level of
some protection, but most likely you won't get all your money back.
Sure, but But how is it so that you see this level of, for me, that's what struck me, that DKM, there was this, whole business about liquidation, and then the depositors had to find their way to the office of the liquidator to go and see whether they will get their monies. But with this, quickly, there's this consolidation, and then quickly they're saying that deposits are, it's safe. The same with Capital Bank and UT. GCB comes in. So
there is a saying that is this way, that when you owe the bank $1, the bank owns you. When you owe the bank $1 million, you own the bank. Some of these institutions are almost too big to fail, and the cost of allowing them to fail will be catastrophic. So that's really what's happening. And that's also why the central bank is asking, up your capital, up your ability to withstand these shocks. And we've all got to identify with that process and not keep asking that our locally managed institutions should be cut slack. They shouldn't. Because when they go down with our funds. Now, one of the other things that I like what you're talking, the difference between DKM and this. Let me tell you one of the things that I found perplexing in this process over the last few days. There's been a lot of commentary, and the commentary has been about people who have lost their jobs and directors, but there's no righteous anger. What do I mean by righteous anger? The funds that the Bank of Ghana is putting in there,
taxpayers' money.
It's our money.
Yes.
And if somebody has chopped $5 billion, that is over $1 billion, it is our money. And there's a certain lack of...
We're not outraged enough.
We're not enraged enough. We're not angry enough. We're not demanding enough of all the people. And it seems as if, oh, it's Bank of Ghana. Oh, they have money. Oh, they can put it in there. It is our money. It is our money. We should be angry that people have taken monies, misappropriated monies, and we are paying.
As the people who are paying there.
Exactly. To support them. So that's one issue that's in all the
discourse. You're not getting that level of outrage.
I'm wondering, am I the only person who's angry?
You're not the only person.
Am I the only person who's... And listen.
You're not the only person. Quickly land and then Dr. Gachi wants to, quickly Dr. Gachi come in.
Dr. Gachi.
Yes. and you be your livid self.
Well, today I want to take the regulatory aspect.
I know, you're so much in their corner now, seriously.
You see, what we have seen so far throughout the history of financial market is that regulators are always reacting to what has gone wrong.
Sure.
You can check from the US.
Sure.
All the laws that came is as a result of something happened before.
Right.
So the point is that when the DKM and the rest happened, did we see such steps? The answer is yes. I think we had what we call the Depositor Protection Act. Okay, so that is the way regulators have been behaving, because it's like those who are doing the nefarious activities are so fast and they go into the wrongs before we get to know. But the larger issue is that what are we going to do about the situation where you go to a community, a chief is an agent of microfinance institution. People are following him. You have a situation where some churches, elders, are the ones who are managing some of these institutions. Given our society, a lot of people are vulnerable. So we need to step up the education of the ills of some of these activities among our people. That we are not doing so much. Because people look at what others are doing and they follow.
Right.
In the case of R5 in those days, reverend ministers lost their money. Military men lost their money. In fact, MPs lost their money. So if an MP is seen associated with a particular microfinance, who is I mean, people from his constituency, not to say that that thing is good. So I think the way people who seem to know are engaging in some of these things, even though the Bank of Ghana and all other people have been talking about, but they keep on associating themselves with this.
But they are allowed to operate within the law, aren't they?
Yes, but
so clearly once they are there...
If you see an institution giving you 50% interest, and you see an MP associating himself with that institution, it draws a lot of people to it. So those of us who seem to have some fundamental understanding of the situation should act in line with our understanding. Again, I'm coming to the regulation issues. So you will realize that because Bank of Ghana has foreseen the scale of this thing, that is where the regulation has actually focused on thematic areas. So if you read section 56 and read the requirement of corporate governance, you will realize that Bank of Ghana is not doing anything different. It's just implementing the requirement, because that is what ought to be done. I don't know whether Bank of Ghana has successfully given clearance to all the directors who have been appointed, because that is now a requirement. So the things happen before
directors of banks.
We make the appropriate laws.
Directors of banks need to be very well.
Yes. They need to do
After
due diligence on them.
due diligence, all those things have gone. In fact, directors' responsibility have actually gone up. In fact, you should be afraid now when you are appointed.
Exactly. It's no easy task. It's no easy task. Quickly, yes.
Another thing.
Mr. Jackson, yes.
We've got to hold the directors up.
Right.
And the rules are there, but unfortunately, in this country, the rules are not implemented as
right.
And I sit on the board of a small financial institution in Nigeria. Listen, you miss 2 board meetings, you get a letter warning you that the central bank will kick you out. if you don't come for a third meeting. I have such a letter sitting with me now because I missed two. Does the central bank give
those kinds of scrutiny to it?
We just
yes, but let's speak to quickly. I'll come back to you. But let's speak to the issue about prosecution of persons who have been found to have engaged in certain activities which clearly are in violation of laws in Ghana. Now, the head of banking supervision, Mr. Osei JC, spoke to this network during the week, and let's take a listen to what he said in respect of Bank of Ghana moving forward with this issue about how to move on with prosecutions, if possible. Let's listen.
Appreciate the concern and the question you have asked. We are not really happy about the situation, but I think we have said it several times over and over that in time past we had some challenges. There was forbearance, maybe compromises here and there. But I think that we should focus on what is happening now, and we should be happy that the regulator did not sweep these matters under the packet, did not cover up, and action has been taken to address the issues. I'm not saying this to rationalize or justify what happened in time past. We regret, but the most important thing is that these issues are being addressed so that they do not recur. I wouldn't say that there was corruption, but there were some omissions and commissions and weaknesses which have resulted in what we are seeing now. That is how I would describe them.
The Bank of Ghana cannot be shielded of responsibility of what's happening now. And indeed, some have called for the prosecution of some of the officials of the Bank of Ghana who presided over this whole process of issuing licenses to these three banks under these fraudulent means, as you said.
I have said over and over that I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think the Bank of Ghana has the mandate to prosecute. We have state institutions that have the responsibility to ensure that they enforce the law. What Bank of Ghana can do at this stage is to collaborate and to maybe provide the evidence available. So when it comes to prosecution, I think we have institutions that are responsible.
So that was the head of banking supervision, at the Bank of Ghana, Mr. Osei JC, speaking to Alfred Okanse in there. And indeed, the press release issued by the bank stated in there that in keeping with the commitment to supporting the orderly development of Ghana's banking sector, the Bank of Ghana will take additional steps to ensure that all relevant parties whose actions contributed to the failure of the 5 banks are held accountable through administrative, civil, and criminal actions as appropriate. But you did hear in there that clearly the Bank of Ghana doesn't have the prosecutorial powers to go ahead to institute any criminal actions against these persons, indeed, if they are found to be liable for anything. But then we would see how best we can get this criminal actions, if necessary, going by the respective agencies of state. When we come back, we'll look into that area of this whole conversation. See you shortly. Welcome back. You're still watching and listening to New Day Saturday edition. We're live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7, and we are live online at 3news.com. Also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. We're still looking at the disturbing situation of 5 banks collapsing with the takeover by the newly created entity, the Consolidated Bank Ghana. Just before the break, we broached the subject of possible prosecutions and who to do that. You heard Mr. Osei there, that's the head of banking supervision at the Bank of Ghana, saying what obviously we all know, that the Bank of Ghana does not have prosecutorial powers. So it is for the Bank of Ghana to perhaps make a complaint. Not too long ago, we saw the president of Ghana, or we heard the president of Ghana make a complaint to the Ghana Police Service. So the question is, what is stopping the Bank of Ghana from making a formal complaint to any of these security agencies to pick up this matter? Honorable Fuseni, I'll start with you.
Well, when I heard it, I was shocked because no one, like you've said, no one has said that the Bank of Ghana has prosecutorial powers. But the Bank of Ghana is a regulatory body. The Bank of Ghana is, is established by statute. The Bank of Ghana regulates banks by statute. And so if there's a breach, which is criminal in nature, they have to enforce the law.
Exactly.
So, what they ought to do, for instance, they've told us that some people misrepresented facts and obtained a certificate. If that is proven, that will be fraud by false pretenses. It's a criminal act. So do you wish it away? No. You have to hold those people accountable. Indeed, if it is true. If it is true that some people move depositors' money without due process, that is misappropriation. That is criminal in nature. Okay? And so, why? We will allow them to do their investigations. And I think that if we want to sanitize the banking sector, because it's quite worrying. Indeed, I'm a customer of Unibank, and I've always believed in Unibank. Since they announced that Unibank was going through some form of receivership or whatever, I was shaken to the core. Because clearly, they had taken a right decision. Okay, and now we are hearing many banks. Agri Development Bank. We are hearing NIB. In fact, in 2009, NIB was in distress. You understand? And so, Bank of Ghana ought to sit up. And I believe, even though Doctor has said that most regulatory institutions take reactive steps, I think they need to take proactive steps. They need to strengthen their supervisory department
and, all,
and go to the banks and see what is actually happening and hold auditors responsible, because auditors ought to indemnify the Bank of Ghana if you produce an audit report that does not reflect the true and accurate status of the bank and gets the Bank of Ghana to rely on that, and depositors suffer thereby. You should indemnify the bank.
Right. True. We need to wrap up on quickly. Yes. You make comments. Yes.
On the backdrop of what Honorable just said, the auditors themselves would have to be blacklisted to start with. Now, and I think it sounds a bit harsh, but if you live in an environment where, when things like of this nature happen, we have this culture of what we call the human factor or human face. And people are allowed to get away with murder. You see, and there are a lot of things that happens in various sectors that have actually nothing to do with even politicians. We always take the brand for it. But this is almost like a malaise in a sector that needs reform. It's important. It's actually reassuring that the new Bank of Ghana governor is being decisive and showing conviction. But I believe that even from where we sit, the Bank of Ghana itself needs serious reform. And it has to be based on benchmarking and being able to look at it from a perspective of what has happened elsewhere. We can't sit and allow a total financial meltdown in this country. It's happening in other parts of the world. Those governments have had to come in to bail out this institution. Now, of course, there are issues to do with, for instance, even employees of some of these banks, where, of course, it's important that they are looked after. But I think that Joe said something about the fact that the average Ghanaian, the ordinary Ghanaian, is actually having to make do with monies that could have been used for other things. I mean, free SHS, water, utilities, healthcare, and all sorts of things are being used to bail out the same Ghanaians.
And that is why we think we are not outraged enough.
We have been asked to protect.
Yeah.
Now, so, I mean, I always go back to the Constitution. We have a Constitution that is meant to govern, and this Constitution is like a Holy Grail, it's like a Bible.
It's supposed to be.
And every single thing that we do in this country is governed by this Constitution. And it's either we decide to do this democracy thing or stop. Because if you're going to do it, then it means that in certain instances, hard decisions have to be made. But you can't eat your cake
And have it.
Yeah.
So even as an ordinary Ghanaian, we should be mindful of the fact that you are bound by some rules and regulations. There's a rule of law in this country. And every single institution or ordinary Ghanaian is meant to be governed by these things. Now, so the Bank of Ghana, nobody's saying that they should go out there and arrest people and put them into jail. But I think that it's imperative that their recommendations and the evidence that is actually found should be given to the appropriate authorities so that it serves as a deterrent. And again, what it means is that it has to be juxtaposed with what are we going to put in place as an entity to be able to
politicians of stealing, of being corrupt. You know what the banks have just done? They plundered our 1 billion Ghana cedis. Sure. Is that what they have done?
dollars.
$1 billion.
Dollars,
Right,
yes.
and
That's what they have done.
See, when you move away from even that space, what is imperative is that the Bank of Ghana itself should, in the next few weeks or so, should come out with new processes to even give us the confidence that they have the capacity to regulate this number of banks. Again, people have made a commentary of the fact that there are too many banks in this country to start with. What are we going to do with the next tier of banks, which is the microfinance and the savings and loans and also of these ones that are mushrooming all over the place? So if we don't have the capacity to regulate all of these ones, let's find innovative ways of making sure that we are going to be proactive about it. Otherwise, what would happen is that every single time we'll be firefighting.
Sure.
And you can't use a firefighting approach in a certain... It doesn't help. It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. Very well. Quickly, I need us to look at the issue about the indigenous banks. There seems to be a certain level of a desire to maintain a strong indigenous presence in the banking sector. Perhaps it's justified, but let me make reference to page 3 of the press release that was issued recently. It says, I'm quoting, "To help ensure that the banking sector maintains a strong indigenous presence, the government has established a new bank called Consolidated Bank Ghana, which will act as a bridge bank pursuant to Section 12711 of Act 930 to assume some of the assets and liabilities of the 5 banks." I mean, clearly we talked about the fact that this whole, action by the Bank of Ghana was in the interest of depositors. But from this paragraph, you get a sense that, yes, well, that's to me, that the interest of depositors is coming in as a corollary to the need to ensure a certain level of presence of the indigenous banks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a likelihood that perhaps the Bank of Ghana, driven by this motivation, may in certain instances, or perhaps could have had its, for lack of a better word, judgment clouded by this desire? So that, well, we need to have the indigenous banks here. We don't want the space to be taken over by foreign banks. So let's perhaps treat indigenous banks with, not to say kids' gloves, but let's just do something that would not necessarily see a wipeout of indigenous banks. Because for me, I find it worrying that all the banks coming up are indigenous banks.
Good. Thank you. Well, I think we need to look at it from 2 perspectives. The act governing the banking sector. Do we have a separate act for indigenous bank and separate one for international? The answer is no.
No.
So if you are, implementing the act, you are implementing the act. But we are not happy that our indigenous banks are going. I will make a case for an attempt to salvage some of the indigenous banks. But there are conditions when you violate. even if you are indigenous bank, you cannot be helped. So the only thing I can say under that is that if we look at the profile of the indigenous bank, and the problem that they are facing is not to the core of the basic or fundamental conditions of holding a banking license, we need to do everything possible to ensure that those banks are actually helped. Coming to the consolidated bank as a means of fostering that, well, I think it's trying to cool the system, but there are a lot of problems I have with it. Number one, I don't know how we can interpret that in the light of Article 192 of the Constitution, which says that no public corporation shall be established unless by an act of Parliament. So I don't know whether we have...
Well, this is a limited liability company as it is.
Yes,
as
but in whose interest? The interest of the people.
With government having
who are the
100% shareholder.
The public office is defined by the Constitution. That is, if the funds are coming from the consolidated fund.
Exactly.
If the funds
Yes, the funds are coming.
Okay, whether you're limited liability or not.
Now we will use our money, establish this bank. We have established it already. We make it lucrative. Then after 2 years, then we start ceding off some of our interest. The process, I don't know. So these are issues that we need to deal with. Now, you also realize that one of the problems brought forward by the KPMG report is that the KPMG report is emphatic that the only way that Unibank, for example, could be saved is for government to pay its indebtedness.
Yeah, but what about the...
Excuse me.
Let him learn.
Excuse me. Now that we have a consolidated bank, I don't know whether the government is going to write off that debt. I don't know whether that will be paid. What does that mean? I don't know. So I think more clarity ought to come to the public in terms of transparency as to how this particular bank is going to be managed.
Going to be dealt
in
with.
fact, how is it going to be regulated? One problem I have is that I don't want to see the regulator being a player at the same time a referee. As we see in the case of ADB, when they were having a problem, when the Bank of Ghana speaks, I don't know whether the Bank of Ghana was speaking as a regulator or as a shareholder who is not happy about the behavior of another shareholder. So I think that's another step that Bank of Ghana need to take to actually get out of universal banks and play the role of a regulator, be proactive, independent, professional, and do everything possible to protect depositors.
Very well. That's a very good point. Thank you. Mr. Jackson, I'm coming back to you with a question that would get you outraged some more. But, you know, I mean, for people like me and obviously you and many others, like we've said here, the Bank of Ghana perhaps delayed in cracking the whip. But then there are those who are also saying that they see the Bank of Ghana's actions as hostile regulation. Do you think this is hostile regulation, or it's something that needs to be done, that needs to have been done a long time ago?
This is, you know, any attempt to politicize what is happening is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. Unless you are doubting the KPMG report, unless you are doubting the figures and statistics that were provided by the governor, what are we talking about? If an institution is insolvent, it is insolvent. If an institution has eaten up its depositors' funds, it has eaten up the depositors' funds. No amount of, and in any case, some of the attempts at politicization should look at what level of loans, etc., was given to related parties, and how much does the government owe them? How much have we spent? Listen, when we talk about what we are spending now, the 5.6 billion, we are not even talking about the liquidity support that has gone in before that, for which I've heard estimates as high as over 3 billion. What are we talking about? The 898 million owed by the government pales into insignificance. So I'm just saying, don't politicize the issue. Fix it. Let's fix it. Let's encourage the governor to fix it. Let's if the governor has definitely shown that he can take action, he can take the pressure, because you can imagine the amount of pressure that comes on him. But listen, when we heard the sound, the audio or the video from the supervisor, he used certain words that had me disturbed. He said, forbearance.
There had been some forbearance in the
What has the regulator got to do with forbearance?
Right.
He says it is regrettable and there were lapses in our judgment. I mean, I'm like, is this a confession? Are we? Maybe we should give him a boot and say, Father, I have sinned, for I am the head of the banking supervision, and I've caught. What is this business? You are the regulator, and you see, what happens is that the lack of decisive action in times past meant that the whole industry was tarred with the same brush. Some of us are angry because we are players in the industry, and when one institution goes down, we immediately have to fetch water and put it behind under our beard. And this is ridiculous. What we should do is encourage the light to shine, encourage those bad nuts to be put away, so that this industry can move forward. But it borders on ridiculous. Right. Every single Ghanaian has had to pay over 250 cedis towards the malfeasance of these banks. Are we for real?
Very well.
Me, I don't have 250 cedis to give away.
We need to take a break. We need to take a break. So we'll take a break. But when we come back, I think Professor Gachi, sorry I've been calling you doctor all this while. I'm sorry. You've earned your professorship. Let me respect that. Professor Gachi will be leaving us. And perhaps you have your last word before you go, and then Well,
I think in all these things we are focusing on the banks overly. But I don't know what will happen to Bank of Ghana in terms of reforms. We need to get a decisive statement as to what they are going to do, because they have actually accepted that there are lapses in their regulatory oversight. What are they going to do?
And they've been forbearing.
Yeah, and those things should be very clear. And I also think that since the public is going to be paying for this, in fact, we have paid some already in terms of the UT and Capital Bank. It has become the baby of the public. So if the public is interested in prosecution of some people, we don't need the Bank of Ghana to take that step. So when we decide, it can happen. So that is very simple. So we don't need the Bank of Ghana to tell us that they cannot do anything. Of course, when you read their ads, most of the penalties are administrative penalties. So it is left with other institutions to take up the matter and deal with it. That is the interest of the people of Ghana, that prosecution to take place.
Very well. Thank you so much there, Professor John Gachi, who has to be leaving us at this point. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll move on to look at other matters lined up for conversation this morning. See you shortly. Welcome back. This is New Day Saturday edition. We are live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7, and we are live online at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. As was announced just before the break, Professor John Gachi left us. In his place, we have Dr. Frankie Asari Donko. He is a political scientist and a media consultant joining us now. Thank you so much for your time, Doc. It's good to have you here. So we'll be looking next at the renegotiated Ameri deal. What is the fate of that renegotiated deal? Is it to be or not to be? We will be looking at that. But before that, let's take a listen to the former Deputy Minister of Power, Mr. John Jinapo, on this particular issue, and we return to the panelists.
The agreement with Miscellaneous International is full of miscellaneous figures, padded, inflated, and contrived, which clearly reveals that the New Deal is fit into a grand scheme orchestrated at the very highest echelon of government to create, loot, and share the spoils of this new agreement. A careful financial analysis of the novated agreement as it stands shows that it offers an overly generous rate of return of 68% as against 17% in the original Ameri deal. President Akufo-Addo must be personally held liable and responsible for this scandal. And we want to put it on record that the president cannot extricate himself from this stinking, scandalous, disastrous deal that is about to wreck the whole nation. We would assume that a seasoned lawyer of a standing, without critical evidence of a legal opinion from the Attorney General and from the Ministry of Finance, to enter into international debt, and also without approval from PURC, and also without approval from the Public Procurement Agency for a sole source deal of this nature, why would the president hastily rush to approve this dubious and scandalous deal?
Okay, so that was Mr. John Jinapor there speaking in Parliament, and he posed some questions which I'm posing directly to Mr. Eric Amwakuchum right here. Why the rush to sign that? Clearly, I do have some news item here reported by 3 News where the presidency, in a statement dated July 25th, Wednesday, July 25th, informed, I believe, wrote to the ministry saying that the president had granted executive approval for that agreement. Obviously, an agreement that didn't have a number of things to make it whole, if you like, but had been given that executive approval. Why the rush?
My brother-in-law, John, Honorable John, was engaged in what we call premature. It's a bit too early. But political premature something. And you see, it's also important, I mean, that when these things happen, we take lessons from that. And I'll give you 2 examples. There's an example of the CDB loan under late President Mills that went to Parliament. My honorable friend was in Parliament. A lot of inputs and recommendations came from even within Parliament itself and then from outside of Parliament. The NDC government at the time went ahead and passed it. And we had issues. As we speak today, there's still fallout from that particular CDB loan where our cocoa and a few other things were actually hedged. And as we speak, it's still pertaining. There's also the famous or the infamous issue of STX. And my good honorable friend was there as well, where the same issues were raised and they still went ahead and passed STS. Now, come full circle, 2018, there's an Ameri deal that in itself, even when this Ameri deal was being passed at the initial stages, issues were raised. They still went ahead and passed it. And I'm surprised that my friends from the other side even have that moral authority or have been able to develop some kind of moral turpitude to talk about Ameri. I was surprised I didn't choke on the words Ameri when he was speaking. And the truth of the matter is that that deal itself is terrible. It's
Great.
bad.
And you came in to right a wrong.
Listen, let me come. I'm just developing a point.
Yes, okay.
Now,
I see the point you're trying to make. That's why I'm helping you fast-track it.
Right. So then it comes to the point where there was a need from the Energy Ministry to look at, especially, and if you look at the arguments coming, the cost of the power that was actually being sold to us by Ameri. And that if there was a way of finding out for Ghanaians, especially the ordinary Ghanaian, and even people in the manufacturing sector or industry, to be able to pay less for their electricity. Yeah. So that was the basis for that. It happens that it went through a certain process. Coming on hindsight, some of the processes were not really checked out, and it had gone back to cabinet. It's gone back to the president. The president has been magnanimous and has actually been shown clear, decisive, and convicted leadership by actually acting that this particular renegotiation be put on hold. So I don't even know why we are having a conversation about a renegotiation.
We will definitely have it.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
so for me, I don't even know why we're having a conversation.
Let me tell you why we're having it.
Because as we speak today, there is no renegotiated Ameri deal.
Okay.
You understand?
Mr. Let me tell you why we are having this conversation.
Okay, go ahead.
Why is everybody laughing? I would prefer that we don't have a conversation.
I know.
I thought that the conversation, the thrust of the conversation would have gone.
Let's have
the president has done a yeoman's job by listening to concerns.
Mr. Richard,
you understand?
Your point is made. Your point is made. Yes, I believe the reaction says it all. But why it is we're discussing this is because, indeed, the Ameri deal was one of the most, it was a major election issue going into elections. Yeah. It became one of the most pertinent election issues. You promised, the NPP government, you promised that when you come into office, if the people of Ghana gave you the opportunity to govern, you would review the agreement and make it better. That level of expectation was there. So everybody, pretty much looking at that. Who wouldn't want to buy power at an affordable cost? Obviously, it's in the interest of the citizens, yes. So you come in, there's a committee that's set up, 17-member committee. You do a review. A number of recommendations are made. And we understand that, of course, the review of this agreement was on the back of the committee's recommendations. Indeed, the committee alleged fraud, which, of course, Ghanaians were looking out to see exactly how that was going to be substantiated. And if indeed substantiated, be a basis for the repudiation of the agreement. Well, that didn't happen. We did hear, however, that the agreement was being renegotiated. So again, level of expectations gone high. Only for us to be told that, well, the renegotiated agreement is it pretty much worse than the original.
Yeah, but
that is why we are having this conversation, because had it not been for the diligence and commitment of certain quarters of the society, this probably would have gone through, and the citizenry again would be burdened with high costs of electricity.
That in itself is not.
And again, you have this agreement being given executive approval. The question then is what went into the decision to give the approval, and which is why we're worried, because what about other agreements? What about other agreements? How can we trust that the processes would be airtight to ensure that every agreement that goes beyond cabinets, goes beyond the executive level, has been taking through a certain process to ensure that the interest of the Ghanaian is protected. And that is why we are having this conversation.
That is the beauty of the democracy that we have today. Now, if you recall, even members of the ruling government, majority in parliament, actually raised concerns about this deal, this contract. Now, what it tells you is that, sometimes as a people, I think that we beat ourselves and we don't give ourselves enough credit. And for me, I think that this is probably one of the pluses for our democracy, our fledgling democracy, in terms of even making sure that the various arms of government are doing what they are meant to do.
Yes, so we expect the executive
you understand? So it's important that we have this conversation. But then I've actually also given examples of what had happened.
But you
in
came
time
in
past.
to it's
simple. But as we speak today, the agreement itself the president has taken a second look at the agreement, has actually alluded to the fact that certain things should have been done before even proceeding to that point, right? And has actually truncated the process. And for me, I think that that is a very good step. Now, the most important thing as well is that you also have to also look at the reasons why the committee actually gave recommendations for a renegotiation. And I believe strongly that even the base agreement, the initial has problems with it. And I think that we can not run away from that. But that does not mean that as a country, we should also compound the situation by going into another agreement that is supposedly even worse than the first one. I think that
wouldn't be prudent.
There's nothing wrong with even leadership. And if we be able to learn that in all facets of our national discourse, I think that we'll be better for it. there's nothing wrong with actually coming back and saying, now listen, maybe I rushed or I made a mistake, and that
as much as possible, let's cut out the rush.
But coming from, we are not going to take moral lessons from the NDC. I know that Honorable Fuseni is going to speak, but they had so many examples that they could have done this thing, would have been better for it.
Really,
and Eric, I gave you, I think he will give it cash on
you gave all those
STS
examples, but I think
CDB loan and
really
all that.
looking at that, well, that's your choice, but really, I don't think that is a good basis to make, you know, these kinds of submissions. But well, Honorable Fuseni.
Mr. Fuseni is okay.
Yes.
Yes, Eric, I know the difficulty Eric is in. Eric, to be honest with you, I've been listening to Eric. Somehow, he speaks on issues with a discerning voice. And so, you could see the difficulty even when he was trying to explain away this matter. I sympathize with you. You might have to come and join us in NDC. You see,
no, never.
The lessons of the Ameri renegotiated deal is not only a governance in nature, it also has a moral question. The moral question is simple. Ameri deal was very prominent in the 2016 elections. NPP then had said that the deal was bad for this country, and that was the reason why businesses were collapsing. When NPP won power, and then the people of Ghana believed what the NPP said and gave them the opportunity to rule, they expected, like you said, Abena, that the Ameri deal will be renegotiated. In fact, it was a legitimate, reasonable expectation of the people of this country. So when you set up the committee to investigate the Ameri deal, to investigate in the first place, the committee led by Anderson. Nobody was surprised. Our only surprise was that the committee itself had compromised itself from the beginning, because they had allowed the company to buy them tickets and host them in luxurious hotels in Dubai. But never mind, they came back with a report. We are yet to see the report. We have not yet seen the report.
The committee report. It's out there.
No, you got it. Then you are privileged.
It's all over. It's on the internet.
Send me a copy.
It's on the internet.
Send me a copy.
Honorable, have you Googled it?
No. Send me a copy.
He has.
And then, indeed, after the committee came back, the Deputy Attorney General, the Minister for Power, Komna Donko, and the Deputy Minister for Energy were arrested, and their houses searched, and their phones seized. It didn't stop there. K.T. Hammond filed a motion of rescission in Parliament on the basis of the fact that Ameri had misled the government of Ghana into entering into the deal. Right. Now, so we thought, so we thought that all this should have put the president on notice. That when a minister comes to you with a renegotiated deal, a novation agreement, you will want further, you will want to consult broadly, especially so that the cabinet memo that was not put before cabinet as duly constituted, but was brought to you for executive approval. And especially as a former member of parliament, knowing full well that when parliament is about to rise, things get rushed through parliament. So you see that there was some deliberate, concerted effort to also mislead parliament.
I don't know about that one, though.
That didn't happen.
I don't know about that deliberate concerted effort.
It didn't happen because of the vigilance of the members of parliament.
Yes, but
because you see,
the committee,
because of the vigilance. You see, why the committee did not even do the financials. They just asked three simple questions. Did the Minister of Finance sign this agreement? Because it's about financials over a period of 15 years. Did the PURC approve of the tariff structure? Did AG give an opinion, legal opinion on the novation agreement? These were the three questions, and they wanted to see the documents. Now, it was the failure of the minister to produce the document that led to further inquiry on the agreement and a further analysis. And what did we see? This Ameri deal, yes, 510, 850 per year over a period of 5 years gives you 510, and then the whole plant would be the property of the government of Ghana because it was built BOOT. Power is purchased under this agreement at 14 cents per kilowatt hour. We have a 5.6% capacity charge. Now, after the 5th year, the sieve to 20 years, power will be bought at 10 cents per kilowatt hour. There will be no capacity charge because the plant is ours. The plant will be ours. So, if you wait 2.5 years, the plant becomes yours. The power becomes cheaper. It even becomes cheaper.
But a quick question on that. What happens after the 5 years is quite. I mean, has been. I find that intriguing in the sense that at that point it would be the property of Ghana.
Yes.
So why the need to have predetermined the rates even before we get to that
power
point? Yes.
No, because the power is produced by the use of fuel.
Sure.
So the production of that power would be about $10.
But I'm talking about I'm talking about the period where it's post the 5 years, which the
because you are taking all the margins.
But would have been a realistic
it will be very
determination.
Determination,
even
yes.
before ahead of
time. Yes, it's done. Yes, it's just that it's done. Just like the renegotiated agreement, which says that power will now be bought at 11
from now, which is quite
from now till eternity, till
2015, the 15 years.
The 15 years time. Okay, because it can be calculated. Now, and in that novation agreement, capacity charge will be $3.5 or so per kilowatt hour over that period. So when you do the financials, the rate, Joe is over there, the rate of return on investment for the company jumps up from 17% to 68%. To 68%.
So clearly not.
Clearly you have just given them.
Not.
And two, so we need to do further investigations into which is the is it miscellaneous or multilaneous? Multilaneous. Which is this company? Who are the shareholders of the company?
So those questions would now come in, but the question is,
so why will you
renegotiated deal even on the table still? It's not. It's been taking off.
As we speak,
the renegotiated deal that was presented. No, but the committee has refused to approve.
No, but
the matter is in Parliament.
Yes.
The matter is in Parliament. We have not yet gotten a communication from the President that we should not consider the matter. We've not. The matter is not the property.
It hasn't been formally.
Yes,
but there's that indication that there was a certain.
You are discussing. You are presuming that the President has crumbled under pressure.
But you heard Eric here.
Eric is saying that where the President has reconsidered the decision.
You heard him.
But the matter is not properly before Parliament. Parliament has not received a communication not to consider the agreement. The only reason why Parliament did not pass the agreement was because the questions could not be answered.
Right.
And so when we receive a communication formally, we will then confirm.
So according to you, the deal is still before Parliament.
It's before Parliament, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you see, but more importantly, you see.
Please wrap up for me.
More importantly, the President said he was misled. I mean, how can the President be misled?
Did the President say that?
But that's you're saying you've not heard anything formally.
But you said
you heard anything formally.
No, did the President
we'll just let that go.
Say that he was
we'll just let that go. Let me turn
from certain quarters.
That's fine. Honorable. You just said that no formal communication. No, but according to Honorable, it hasn't even been withdrawn. Just a minute. One at a time, please. One at a time. Honorable, you just said that you haven't heard anything formally come from the presidency. So as far as you are concerned, it's still before.
Thank you very much.
Let's just move on with I think that's settled. Now, Let me hear from you, Doc. This whole thing. Clearly for me, what's coming out or what's striking for me is that in all this, the committee needs to be commended because they exercise some level of diligence to bring us to this point in Parliament by extension, but also civil society. And in this case, you're looking at ASIP. And it's interesting that ASIP has been with this Ameri deal from day one. So that speaks volumes about the how do I put it?
The focus and credibility.
No, not even that. The original agreement itself and whether or not it's even in the interest of the country. Because ASEP had also raised issues about that.
And
so for me, ASEP is yes, you believe ASEP on that, so we can as well believe ASEP on the previous judgment they put on the original deal as well. I suppose so, can't we, Doc?
Yeah. Let me first say that I particularly hate this issue of equalization.
Totally.
Yes. That's where Eric
But sometimes you can't do without it
that's
when you're
where,
analyzing issues.
That's where Eric began.
Oh, no, I did not.
And that's you were citing
yes.
You were citing things that the NDC did.
Yes.
Yes.
The fallacy of red herring.
All those issues for us as Ghanaians and as voters felt that the government didn't perform properly. And so I believe that is part of why NDC lost. And so, if new government comes in, it is not only MPP which is doing it, it's something like between the NDC and MPP. They are always trying to equalize, oh, you did this and you did that. If those acts were good, I'm not sure anybody is going to refer to them that because you did this, you cannot speak about this. This issue of morality shouldn't come in when we are ready. And the other issue I want to talk about is, if I were to advise government, MPP government, on governance issue, one of the things I would have wished that they were taking critical look was this Ameri issue, because it was clearly part of the election campaign.
Sure.
And then we all know about all the issues that were raised. So for me, when it came up again, and then it ended the way it has ended at this point, I felt that we haven't learned anything. And the other issue about Parliament or the committee taking credit for this, for me, is laughable. Because that is what Parliament is supposed to do. And because of the way we've practiced with this our hybrid system where every MP wants to be a good boy, a good girl, to catch the eye of the president for ministerial appointment, so far as the presidential party is in majority, everything is just swept to that way. So we haven't seen our parliament. So when I heard this, that both majority and minority all spoke against it, I said, yes, perhaps for me, this is the first time I've seen
and that's why we are commending them. And that's
so
why we are commending them.
We don't have to commend them for doing for doing what
they're not doing.
What they are there for, which we pay them. We give them a car loan, which they spend for 4 years. We give them houses. That's their job. And we've not have this kind of bipartisan approach to things in Parliament. And I think that if they've done this, they should continue from this.
Right.
The other issue is, people are saying that the president has been misled. We haven't heard from the president himself. And that is the assumption we are making. Whether he has been misled or not, I think something didn't go right. First, the marriage issue is a thorny issue. So, government taking it again should have had a critical look at it.
Right.
And again, even if they agreed to handle this issue, there are so many steps. They should have gone through several processes. I believe that the presidency has technical teams for all the various thematic issues. And so this issue should have been dealt by that technical team. Beyond that, the minister in charge of this sector would have sent this into cabinet for cabinet members to discuss. So if this issue was not discussed at cabinet, then I also believe that there was a failure. Because this issue shouldn't be left with a minister. We must remember that we are running an executive presidency. So that's why the Minister of Finance goes to Parliament and reads the budget on behalf of the president. So no minister It's an island. So I can't see why the Minister of Energy will be left to handle this issue alone, because whatever he does, he is doing that on behalf of the president. So the president cannot say that the minister did this and then I wasn't aware. There is no excuse for that. Again, we have the Attorney General bringing the legal aspect of whatever government wants to do. Where was this legal advice? And then this is a financial commitment. So we have a minister who's also responsible. Then what about the economic management team headed by the vice president? So I think that there were so many lapses. Whoever drafted the letter, the final one for the president to sign or authorize this, also made a mistake. Because the president is ruling a country and he cannot do alone. That's why he's appointed people to do it. So before anything gets to the president, whoever is the desk officer, whoever is responsible, must have looked at, yes, before the president signs this document, this and this and this must be present. So clearly there were failures. And we don't, I know that we don't have this culture of resignation and all that. Elsewhere, the Minister of Energy might have resigned by now.
Well, there are calls for him to resign.
Because
or to be sacked.
He was the minister responsible for this. And he should have ensured that all the components have been added to that document. The legal one, the finance ministry, economic management team, whatever it is. And I also think that he could have personally, having received all this, briefed the president before the president could be committed into saying yes or no. And so let us not think that nothing went wrong. And we also need to commend government that having realized that there was a mistake. That is what I think that.
But if we can't commend Parliament, why should we commend government?
That's what they're supposed to do.
You see? Yes.
But
we have a culture here. We have a culture from 1993 that sometimes people, Parliament, civil society, voters, ordinary people will say that this thing is not good. And we have a culture in this country that governments close their eyes, their ears, they don't listen. So if at any point one act comes in, then we need to say that yes, this is how this is how governance should be. That because we are in power doesn't mean that you have all the wisdom. And so it's good that they've realized this Amari issue, people spoke against it. Government at that time didn't listen. Now government at this time didn't listen initially and went ahead. Now they realize, okay, we are making a mistake, so we need to go back. So I don't think that as we move on, it's taking us too long, about 20 years, to do the same mistakes over and over again. So I think that some people are saying that heads should roll. I believe that government, you see, there's too many embarrassments to the presidency.
Right.
Ministerial actions or departmental actions. I don't know whether it's deliberate to target the president or whatever it is. But whatever it is, it's because the president sometimes hasn't taken the action of forcing people to resign for doing that or sacking them. So I think that we need to see that when people are given responsibility and they fail, then the
right sanctions are taken. Very well. Mr. Joe Jackson, Mr. Eric Chum described the President's Act as being magnanimous. That and Dr. Asari Donko is also saying that government has done a good job by listening, and I mean, from your face, I know what you mean.
I can't imagine how you can put this spin on this under any circumstance whatsoever. I mean, Eric, forgive me, but this is so ridiculous that I don't even know where to start.
Eric, allow him, please.
Eric, this was a major issue. It was a major issue. Ab initio, there's one thing we all agree on. The original Ameri deal was bad. When you look at the new figures, Eric, you don't even need a calculator. Just the look at those figures tells you, somebody must be thinking, somebody must be living in some different land. And or did somebody smoke some weird kind of
herb
or tea, drink some weird tea before they came up with these numbers? I mean, it's incredible. Forgive me. The president promised us that he will protect the purse. In this case, we expected him to go back and fix it. Not only did he go, was it not fixed? It was made worse. Me, I have one appeal. Mr. President, you are our president. We have to believe you were misled, because any other kind of belief will take us down lanes we don't want to go to. I beg you, you have been embarrassed. Sack somebody. Sack somebody. You are our president. We believe you. Sack somebody. Let somebody be responsible for misleading you. He has to be misled.
If he was misled.
No, I have to believe that. Any other belief will give me trouble. In this case, I have to believe that the president was misled. And if this, you see, you are our president. You have been embarrassed. Sack somebody. Make somebody responsible. Don't let's go down this lane. Me, I don't have anything to say on this matter. On that
passionate plea from Mr. Jackson, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll wrap up on this and then tie this conversation in with what the president has been saying recently about his commitment to protecting the public purse. You heard Mr. Johnson right here, Mr. Jackson, sorry, right here about the public purse protection. See you shortly. Welcome back. You're still watching and listening to New Day Saturday edition live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7 and online at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. We are wrapping up on in fact, we finished with our conversation on the renegotiated Ameri deal. What is the way forward in respect of the Ameri deal? What does Parliament currently have before it? Where are we going with this? But we'll move our conversations forward with a related aspect, as it were, to something the President said during the course of the week in respect of his commitment to protecting the public purse. And we'll take a listen to that and come back. Now, the President has said in respect of that he thinks he's been given a bad name to be hanged as a dog, and some other comments has come up from the former president, JDM, who is, cautioning the current president, against the use of animalistic idioms, because he referred to himself not too long ago as a dead goat and it had repercussions. So he says, well, Mr. President, you may just want to look out for referring to yourself as a dog. Let's take a listen to what the president said and then come back to the panel.
The stringent and desperate efforts being made by my political opponents to not tarnish me and members of my family with corruption will simply not wash. I did not come into public life to make money out of public service. And members of my family know fully well they have to behave and are not involved in anything untoward. I am aware that you give a dog a bad name in order to hang it. But this dog will not be hanged.
This dog will not be hanged, according to the President. Doc, start us off. You're laughing.
No, this is a doctor. No, doc.
Yes.
It's interesting. The advice coming from his predecessor that he shouldn't use idioms.
Animalistic idioms.
Yes, and I also found something interesting on the Twitter page where the two animals were put there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the goat who was put there was alive, so you didn't get the correct picture.
Yeah.
I want to talk about corruption. Anna Akufo-Addo said before the elections that I'm not corrupt, I have not been corrupt, and I cannot be corrupted. And he threw that challenge. So everybody is looking up to him. And so what I think that if I find him corrupt, I should bring the evidence. We've been tarnishing politicians with this brush, and it's not helping us. That's why many people shy away from going to politics. And sometimes we bring the person down only to see that what we said about them were just mere perceptions. And so I think that, and sometimes these kind of things come from the politicians themselves. Okay, so when they themselves throw those things dead against themselves, then the media pick it up, and then society pick it up. Then it's just a mere perception.
Right.
Then it becomes a reality.
Right.
So I think that I don't expect the president to be spending time in speaking like this, because if anybody has anything against any person, not even the sitting president or any other person, I think the right thing you have to do in the democracy is to bring the evidence.
Very well.
Because here we don't have people resigning. But if you bring the evidence and you take the due process, then we can be able to establish facts.
Very well. Mr. Jackson, quickly, clearly, I mean, it's one thing to, be speaking about what you stand for, what you believe in and all of that, as opposed to what people think or perceive you to be. It's one, I mean, otherwise it would be mere rhetorics. You say this, but people perceive you not to be doing certain things, because this government perhaps has seen a number of scandals in its early days, and the president has been accused of, as it were, sitting in the Flagstaff House and clearing, his people. That goes to the question as to what the president or the president's commitment to ensuring that people who have had allegations made against them and, perhaps some evidence brought forward or some attempt to be made into looking into it, how such situations have been dealt with, which clearly speaks to your commitment to dealing with corruption. So it's not so much of what you stand for or what you think you stand for, but what people see by your actions that you were doing.
Yeah, but I want to actually introduce another slightly different element. I think that the president in this particular case was actually referring to fake news that's been going around. There have been, I have seen articles that on first sight I thought were online, were true, that his daughter had purchased
in the UK somewhere.
Equipment, houses, property in the UK. And that was on critical examination, you find out that was fake news. So I think what he was saying was that people are trying to put out fake news, and fake news have been coming from both sides of the divide.
Sure.
We've seen fake news about MPs having registered for the, including pictures, etc., which were all fake news. But the critical thing is this. One, we've got to condemn fake news. That just poisons the discourse and is red meat for the foot soldiers, etc.
Yeah.
But the president has to realize that the smell of corruption and the stench of corruption seems to be rising. And some of it cannot just be written off as fake news. Yep. And you see, and unfortunately we have to go back and look at even this issue of the Ameri deal and all the issues that and especially when sometimes the reports are coming from within his own party and disgruntled persons who are affiliated with the party. Then it gets messy, right? Fake news, bad. But the stench is there. And unless he takes decisive action to make a scapegoat of anyone who is caught in that trap, that stench will continue.
Yes, and no amount of declarations would necessarily, get people's perceptions, or if you like, misperceptions corrected, because perceptions, I mean, when it comes to corruption, it obviously boils down to perception, and that is what we need to deal with. And how do you deal with that? By example. So we see exactly what is happening. So clearly we do understand this bit about the fake news and everything. I mean, we don't endorse fake news, but there's a certain level to which you can control it. But what do you do to shield yourself from such things?
Well, it's key that as a country, I think that everybody on this platform and even everybody out there has that firm conviction that corruption is something that is inimical to the very existence of our country. Which means that whatever it is that needs to be done to stem that and then create structures and processes to make sure that doesn't happen is done. Now, I think that Mr. Jackson actually has just taken the wind out of my sail. So the specific allegations of financial malfeasance or corruption or some sort of untoward acts that have been committed by members from the family of the president that he was basically making reference to. It's also okay that people would use all sorts of attempts to try and throw mud and call it politics. I mean, I have been a victim to it in my small career in politics. But you take it on the chin. We also have a situation where we are governed by rule of law. Now, the mere allegation, and I think that we have to be very careful in this country. Otherwise, almost everybody would probably be shy away of going into public office. The mere fact that some sort of allegation has been made does not necessarily mean that the person is culpable. Now, I find it quite distressing that even in situations where the president has actually activated state institutions or used constitutionally mandated entities to do these investigations, people still come out and say that they've been cleared. Now, I mean, it's as if that once you are accused of doing something, you're guilty, which is not supposed to be the case. So I think that it's important that if allegations are made, the right steps are taken to have it investigated. And then if it's found out that you're culpable, then the processes should take its course. Right. Now, we've had this conversation about the fact that politicians will throw all sort of accusations and counter-accusations against each other. And it's been such to the point that we have actually taken our eye off the ball. We have sat here, we're talking about crisis in our financial sector, in the banking sector and everything, right? I don't know any politician in this country, for instance, that would even have access to $1.3 billion of people's money. You know, by virtue of the things that we do. So whilst it's imperative that we make sure that we have public officials, we have politicians who would come into positions of authority that would not be engaged in acts of corruption or things that would be inimical to the state. It's imperative that we look at it from a bigger perspective. Because if we don't do that, we lose sight of, listen, we've had exposés in our football, for instance. As you speak, we're not even playing football. And we're supposed to be playing football. We're a footballing nation, right? And all of these things are things that is almost inherently within ourselves as a people. Can you imagine that even if there's national service postings, right, people want to rig the system to the point that you have people even acting as middlemen. Or you have a parent saying that, oh, my daughter has been sent to Koforidia. I want my daughter to do national service in Accra. But whose daughter should go and do national service in Koforidia or something? And so there are issues within our body politics and even the moral fiber of this nation that needs to be looked at.
Very well.
But the mere allegations that somebody is involved in corruption and everything, in my case, it's not a basis to say that because the perception is out there. Otherwise, then people will be hanged even before. We've had occasions where people had been hanged for taking loans from banks. And when it happened that they actually came to take the helm of affairs of this country, they did even worse. That's based on perception. We could have gone, we can give you 100 examples, but my professor here will say that I'm doing equalization.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
It's very
Thank you, Eric. Yes, quickly, honorable. It always starts with an allegation, doesn't it?
The attempt at the president to explain away the rising incidence of corruption, firstly, by accusing the minority in parliament of raising issues of corruption against his government. You know, when he came to give the State of the Nation. And now, his move from his government to his family is an unmitigated disaster. Corruption is on the increase. It's rising. I mean, the Transparency International has said that. Pence plus Fight. Yes, has said that. So everybody knows that corruption is rising. Now, today we are yet to receive official communication from the president withdrawing the Amere deal. But when you put that against the president's pledge to protect the public purse, then you see that the Amere deal was intended to raid the public purse. What does that tell you? Then you see the cult power. That this was an issue that we raised, the MPP raised, as an arrangement or a contract that did not secure the interests and welfare of the people of Ghana. Then the MVP comes into office and extends the card power by a period. Was it influenced by the same considerations that has influenced the American deal? Then you see the old president who said that there was nothing fundamental wrong at Boston. That nothing. That Afro Obin did nothing. Today, Afro Obin has been removed without reasons. So you see, no one is going to give a dog a bad name.
No, but does he have to give reasons for removing him?
No, he doesn't have.
Yeah.
He doesn't have. But no one will give a dog a bad name and hang it. In fact, when you see a bad dog,
you know. but he did raise some issues about fake news, which is quite legitimate, though.
In fact, when he spoke about that one, when I read that story, so
about his daughter,
and the pictures of the building in London, the thing was so well written that I thought, so who would have gotten all these facts? Is it the estate agent who wrote this or what? And then, or what? Well, so you see, when people begin writing these stories, Donald Trump has made fake news very, I mean, topical. I mean, and he thinks that all news is fake news. Now people are even teaching journalism schools how to detect fake news. Sure. So it's an issue now.
It's a legitimate issue we need to look at.
But the president will have to look at his government. There's an invidious responsibility on the president to hold on to what he promised the people of Ghana.
Very well.
And that is what we are demanding of him. You see, I'm not surprised that there's conflict in even the ministries and people are engaging in other activities. Because when you create conflict or conflictual situations in your appointment, these things will come out.
Very well, Honorable. We need to take a break, but before then, I'll take some messages. This one is coming in from, well, there's no name. It says, good morning to my honorable panelists. It surprises me sometimes when I hear banks talking about non-performing loans. My question is, who took the loans and why are they not paying? I know for government workers, their loans are deducted from through automatic means before workers can even take their money. And even if the bank hasn't deducted their own, no one can ever cash all the money who is not paying for their loans. Okay. Good morning, Abena. So Mr. Jackson agrees it is a greater risk to invest money in a non-bank. How does he explain the 5 million that the Auditor General's report revealed was invested at, he's talking about some investment at Dalex Bank. Well, I think we'll move on with that. With the DKM and God is Lab issues, I think it was purely political decisions by the president to liquidate DKM just to win votes. This is because, okay, that's your conspiracy theory. My question is, can somebody tell what is going on, why this era every bank is collapsing? That's Reverend Acosta in Kumasi. Michael Amining in UK says, kudos to the current BOG governor for taking swift and pragmatic measures in protecting the local banks from running into bankruptcy. The minority are being hypocritical for criticizing the government of President Akufo-Addo for cheap political gains, forgetting that most of these banks acquired their fictitious licenses under the leadership of Eswal Mahama-led government. We urge the Bank of Ghana governor to make certain officials who connived with these distressed banks to obtain fictitious licenses to face the full rigors of the law. And this one says, good morning. AU Farouk in Tamale says, good morning. What is really happening to our local banks? Yes, our economy is not moving well. Where is Dr. Baumia? Is he in the country? This one also comes in from Gideon in Amasam. He says, the head of banking supervision should have been fired or would have been fired in other serious jurisdictions. But here we are with ours still at post. Another one, last one I'll take here, it says that Ghana has some of the most beautiful laws you can find anywhere. Our challenge is implementation, enforcement, compliance, and sanction. If there are clear evidence of breaches of Act 930, then the appropriate sanctions must be applied. You don't toy with people's sweat. That's Sylvester Mensah in Kasam Kwabre East. I hope this is not Sylvester Mensah from the NDC we'll be talking about next. We'll take a break. When we come back, we go to look at what's happening with the NDC. They can stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching and listening to New Day Saturday edition. Next, we'll be looking at the NDC and the flag bearership race within that party. This week, the General Secretary, Mr. Johnson Esiedun Ketia, spoke at a press conference, and he indicated or declared the campaign for the flag bearer elections opened with immediate effect. The date has been set for the election, the flag bearer elections, and the date is the 7th of December 2018, 24 months before or ahead of the general elections of the country, in accordance with the NDC's constitution. We'll take a listen to the General Secretary of the party and some other people, or I believe specifically the Honorable John Nabu, who reacted to a statement that he is one of the 94 minority MPs who have signed up in as an acknowledgement of their endorsement of former President John Dramani Mahama. We'll take a listen to that and return to the panelists for their perspectives on this issue.
Individuals want to declare their support for one candidate or the other. We don't have any issue with that. In other words, whilst it is totally permissible for a constituency chairman to declare that I support candidate A or B, it will be offensive to our rules to declare that this particular constituency, Fantiakwa constituency or Ayensuanu constituency, has declared our support for one particular candidate. Now that we have officially opened the campaign, we will be monitoring, and we want to caution all those persons who want to lead this party to conduct a campaign that is decent, that is decorous in terms of the choice of language, and that is devoid of personal attacks. We would want to hear your vision and mission about your proposed leadership.
John Jirawe, he brought the paper to me in this office that I should sign the paper. And I told them what paper is that? That they are doing those who are supporting Mahama. And I said, do they have ass blocks locked up in their ears? Don't they know that I'm supporting Honorable Bagwin? They waited. When we were now doing the attendance sheet, when we were signing the attendance sheet, then they also added some papers. And you see, one MP might have gone to the washroom. She or he may come back. He will see that people are signing that paper, thinking that it is normal routine of the attendance sheet.
Okay, great. So, okay, so that says it all, I believe. Honorable Hussaini, is there a list of 94 MPs and NOC?
It's quite shameful and disgraceful to think that someone can be misled into signing a form or a paper for which he doesn't associate with. Attendance sheets of Parliament are at the mails room. When you get to Parliament, before you get into the chamber, you go to the mails room and sign attendance.
You never sign attendance sheets?
No, you don't sign attendance sheets when you are sitting in the chamber. And if you fail to sign the attendance sheet, there's always a gentleman who marks the register. He doesn't need to come to you and ask you whether you are present. On seeing you, he takes, and then they will go and reconcile it with the attendance sheet. Yes, there is a group in Parliament that is known and that has elected to support the candidature of John Dramani Mahama. I'm part of the group.
Okay.
I'm part of the 94 MPs. You might be even the first person to have signed the list.
Okay. You are the originator of the list.
No, I'm not the originator. But we were collecting the signatures of persons who had elected to support the candidature of John Dramani Mahama. You see, when you decide that you are going to rally yourselves together to pursue an agenda, you must be speaking on the same platform, on the same voice. You must be singing from the same hymn book. You must be regulating the conduct of your members. And so we started with few membership. Okay, while we were trying to convince our other colleagues to come on board, the numbers kept increasing. We went to 80. Now we are about 94.
Okay.
Who knows? Maybe by the time we go for the presidential elections, we will be 106.
So, Honorable Nabu says he signed it, but so clearly -1 there.
Nabu is known. His views on John Mahama presently are known. They were known before the list came out. And there was no attempt whatsoever to mislead Nabu into
signing. So is he on the list?
He's not on the list. It's not on the list. Just like Keita MP. He's not on the list. Koshiga is not on the list. Koshiga has not signed the list. Nabu has not signed the list.
Okay.
But we would have not relented in our efforts to convince both Nabu and Koshiga that John Mahama represents the best opportunity.
Very well.
For the NDC.
We are running out of time, so we just need to move on. But quickly, before I move to other panelists, we've seen this week that there seems to be a certain groundswell of support for some other candidates. And I mean, in this case, I'm talking about Professor Joshua Alabi, where we've seen 2 key personalities in the party come out to endorse him. You have Honorable Kenneth Drassa, you have Ambassador Victor Beho coming up. And all these, clearly, Mr. Ambassador Beho, for instance, has described Mr. Mahama as a failure of sorts, because looking at the level of defeat in the 2016 elections, he thinks his popularity has since that time been declining. He's not marketable, and so perhaps it's time to have a new regime in terms of a rebranding of sorts for the NDC. You clearly are a die-in-the-wool supporter of Mr. Mahama. What do you say to such oppositions, if you like, or some those kinds of opinions coming in?
With greater respect to Victor Beho, Ambassador Victor, he was out of the country for a very long time. He kept touch with the country, but he was out of the country. He did not engage in the campaign on the ground, and that's why he says what he is saying. I respect him. I mean, he's an ambassador, a politician, a diplomat. But you see, NDC went into the elections from a negative. NDC had done 8 years as a party. In 2009, J.E.A. Mills won the elections with a difference of 50,000 votes. In 2012, John Dramani Mahama won the elections with a difference of 100,000 votes. In 2012, John Dramani Mahama won in 8 regions. Nana Akufo-Addo won in 2 regions. The difference was 100,000 votes. That should be telling you the deficit from which we are coming. NDC was suffering from voter apathy because we had done 8 years. We were marketing John Dramani Mahama to win the elections and set a new record and change the 8-year cycle. We were unsuccessful. But we knew exactly, that going into the elections was going to be difficult because you had 100,000 votes, which could be covered easily by the MPP. Now, what was the strategy of the MPP? To cover the 100,000, they needed to attack our strongholds. And they needed to create a reason why people should vote for them. For the NDC, to increase our chances to win, we needed to attack the strongholds of the MPP. And that was why we came out with 1 million votes in Ashanti and 50-50 in Eastern region. Our policy did not work. We didn't get the 50-50. We didn't get the 1 million. But we knew it was going to be difficult. So I think that what Ken Jirasa and Victor Beho should do, should go back and look at what happened. Very well. Quickly, let me just move to Eric, what on your perspectives on this?
I'm struggling to understand the analysis, but that's fine. I think that what the other candidates would do is just carry the Kwesi Botwe report and go around and campaign. I will not.
But you know the content of the Kwesi Botwe, because I
will not be sitting here and be proffering opinions on who the NDC should choose as a flag bearer. But it's also imperative that we state clearly that even in the quest to endorse former President John Mahama, there seems to be all sort of counter views as to what really transpired. I think that it's imperative that they clarify that, because it doesn't augur well for the largest opposition party in the country to even not being able to do something as simple as an endorsement, or I mean how they sort of operate as a minority party. So that is fine. I will not describe the 4 or 5 aspirants in the same colorful language that their general secretary did some time past, because I think that we've moved away from that. The issue about the Ghanaian people having a choice to just oppose the performance of an MPP administration and that of the NDC administration is something that I think that everybody within government, the president himself, is open and it's welcoming, because then Ghanaians would have an opportunity to make a decision between the sort of governance that we witnessed under President John Mahama and then the late President Mills. And they'll make a decision. And I am very much confident that if it boils down to that alone, the Ghanaian people will give the NPP another opportunity to govern this nation. And if you want me to sort of list the plethora of things that the president has already done and committed to do.
I think we can hold that for another time. We are running out of time, so we can hold that for another time. Mr. Johnson.
we wish them well. I think that they can also take a cue from how we conducted ourselves and make sure that it's
everything is peaceful
of any sort of personal attacks. And I was surprised
quickly
when my honorable friend here decided he was not going to Parliament again. I thought that he was actually going to throw his hat into the ring. It would have been a fantastic flag bearer. Maybe you should consider that. But anyway, I'm sure
it's never too late. You never know. He's pondering on that, Mr. Jackson. Your thoughts on this whole 94 MPs endorsing and what's happening recently within the Team Alabi camp and all of that?
Yeah. First of all, you can't begrudge anybody from deciding to support one candidate or the other.
Sure.
That's perfectly within, and I don't think that they presented themselves as a parliamentary bloc per se. So nothing can be said there. That there was an attempt to coerce somebody is what kind of muddied the waters a bit. But regardless, I think we can put that behind us and move forward. It's going to be an interesting season for the MPP, and it seems like the major candidates coming up now is Professor Alabi. Some of us, Joshua Alabi, some of us predicted that he was the strongest candidate against
JDM.
Yes, JDM. So we're looking to see. It's early days yet.
It's early days yet, yes.
Very early days yet, and.
Because the likes of Honorable Fuseni haven't declared their intentions yet, so.
No. There's one thing though. What we're looking for is to see some restraint in the amount of money that is spent.
Which has been put out there by the General Secretary. He's cautioned them, yeah.
Yes, that's. It will be good to see some restraint. The amount of money being spent on campaigns are rising each time, and the lesson from the last campaign was that the most money does not necessarily win.
Sure.
So we hope
that strategy.
Yes.
You need to work. Yes, quickly, Doc.
Yeah, one thing I want to say is that internal political conflicts usually leave wounds that are difficult and taking long time to heal. So political parties must be careful about the way they run their internal politics. We've seen it all these years, and we just left Cambodia, where MPP finished the conference, and naturally there are wounds that are to be healed, and one only knows how long it will take those wounds to heal. So I'll caution political parties as we are building our democracy to do that.
But the NDC seems to have healed itself from all the unity works that was
the unity work itself was another issue. Today, people say it's a unity work, and unity, if the word is actually applied correctly, unity where only one of the prospective candidates was leading, and the rest you didn't find.
He wasn't the prospective candidate. Well, he hadn't declared his intentions,
we knew from some of his former appointees said months ago that John Mahama was going to go in again and all that. So we knew. We are yet to hear he himself declare. But one thing with this, the endorsements.
Look, I need you to wrap up quickly because I'll tell
political endorsements are not anything new. But when institutions endorse candidates, then it becomes problematic because you cannot use an institution. How many of the MPs in Parliament did consult their constituents? So if they are doing that in their own personal capacities, I don't have a problem. But if they are doing that as a block, you have 106 MPs. And if you say 94 says, yes, 94 says we are endorsing one candidate, you are clearly dividing the party. So I think they
have said categorically that it's not as a minority bloc in Parliament, it's just they as members of the minority who are coming out. So clearly I think your problem, it's well noted though, but perhaps it's resolved there. But thank you so much. This is where we bring the conversations to a close. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to look at others. But it's been a great time. Thank you so much for your time with us. And thank you for the panelists, Honorable Inusa Fuseni, Eric Amwakuchum, Dr. Frankie Asari-Donko, Mr. Joe Jackson, and of course, Professor John Gachi was here with us. Thank you so much. We'll see you back here next week. Bye-bye.